good afternoon. It is afternoon now. In case many of you don't know me, my name is Curtis. I'm one of Chief Tarbet's lieutenants here at your Redmond Police Department. I had the privilege of coming before you probably 9 months ago, and we spoke at a round table about some staffing issues and the difficulties that are certain to that. I may have done that strategically, knowing that I would be coming back to propose a solution to that staffing problem. And that solution takes looks like a public safety fee that we're proposing to City Council, and if so passed by City Council, would put a $6 monthly fee on the monthly utility billing for those who receive water, sewer, stormwater services from the City of Redmond. So, in a nutshell, that's what this presentation is about. I will go into some detail. What we will talk about is we're going to give you again a 10,000-foot kind of elevation overview of the Redmond Police Department. Can't have a discussion about police staffing without talking about crime, so we'll go into a little bit about that.
So multi-unit complexes, how will that $6 per bill work out if you have like 6 units, 1 bill
per door? It would go per door. So like a 10-unit apartment complex, it would be per door. Also, it does depend upon if it's a duplex type scenario or a triplex or 4-unit apartment. If they have different water meters, they would all each be billed the same. Or if it's one, it would be considered a multi-housing family, and multi-family, and it would be get a discount with similar to the storm water fee and water service fee that's already in place.
So for a 6-unit complex, would it be $36 extra, or would it be some lesser amount than that?
36. It would be lesser than that because of the multifamily detailing, which is about 25% off. So 422.
468 is
468
is the discount. So
discount for the multifamily.
So if it's a 10 units, 10 times 468, so 46 and change.
The same with commercial building? Multiple?
Flat rate, yes. Flat rate, so per door, flat rate commercial building. So I'm going to dive into the conversation here. I understand we'll probably have a lot of questions, and I hope so. That's the purpose of this. We'll also hit upon the financials and why or how we got to this position, and some benefits that we feel that the police department we can bring back to the City Council and those who live in the city as a measurable benefit to this public safety fee initiative. First off, your Redmond Police Department has 38 sworn officers. With the new budget year, July 1st, we have 38 positions. We have 37 of those filled right now. We have one nearing the end of the hiring process, and we hope to have that person on sometime in January. Going back to 2008, so 10 fiscal years ago, we had 37 sworn officers. Today we have 38 positions. In 10 years, a net gain of 1 officer. The City of Redmond population has grown significantly in that meantime, to the point where patrol officers on duty at this time cannot keep up with demand. We're proposing this as a solution to help with staffing. Our officer per thousand ratio right now is 1.35 officers per thousand, whereas back 10 years ago we had nearly 1.5 officers per thousand. Led by Chief Tarbet, it's the vision of the Redmond Police Department to make Redmond the safest community in Oregon. It is an achievable goal. We believe it to be achievable, or else we wouldn't have identified it as something that we want to accomplish. There has to be number one somewhere. Why not us? Let's talk a little bit about crime. Can't talk about crime or police staffing without addressing the elephant in the room. What does your police department respond to? The short answer is everything. Dog at large, barking dogs in the middle of the night, all the way down to homicide investigations. Police department, and we've had a handful of homicide investigations, but your police department is a full-service law enforcement agency. We do it all. All these types of calls of service that we respond to works out to approximately 23,000 calls for service every year. and that number, of course, is trending upward as our population goes up. This is calls for service, people picking up the phone or getting on the internet and requesting to speak to an officer. Not self-initiated activity like traffic stops or person stops in the middle of the night when an officer is patrolling your neighborhood and sees someone that is suspicious and checks them out and tries to talk to them. Number 4 on that list, I recognize the print small, but I wanted to get as much in this slide as possible. Number 4 on that list is our number 1 criminal response, which is theft, burglary, robbery, and stolen vehicles. Farther down, about 2/3 of the way down, you see in blue drug-related crimes. But don't kid yourself that Redmond doesn't have a drug problem. We know that those theft crimes are driven by drug issues. Stolen property is currency in the drug world. When we go into a drug house with a search warrant and we are looking for evidence of drug sales, we always find stolen property. And we do our best to get that back to owners. So there is a nexus between drugs and our number 1 criminal response of theft. Those 23,000 calls for service breaks down to 938 calls per officer per year. Now, not all 38 officers at the Redmond Police Department are responding to calls for service. The chief does not respond to calls. I don't respond to calls. And we have detectives that are doing specialized investigations, sex crimes, child abuse crimes, homicide investigations, that aren't taking those calls, but they are doing other types of necessary police work. So of the officers that are taking calls, our patrol staffing, that's over 900 calls per year that they're responding to per officer. We'd like to see that number back down to 700, which is much more manageable. Our shifts, to maintain 24/7 coverage, we have 4 patrol teams. They work 12-hour shifts, 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. or 6 p.m. to 6 a.m. 12 hours sounds like an awful long time to get some work accomplished, and it is. But as you can see, 12 hours can be eaten up quite quickly. Some of these you may be able to relate to, especially the motor vehicle crashes, if you yourself have been in a motor vehicle crash, or you've been in the traffic backup as a result of a motor vehicle crash. We have officers that are responding to these calls, and it's more than just one officer most of the time. You see there's a couple examples up here, the number of officers it takes to respond to these types of calls. One thing that many individuals do not think of when it comes to police work is the amount of report writing and paperwork that goes into all these other things you see up on the list here. It does us no good to do an investigation, to arrest anybody, and take them to jail if an officer does not have the time to write a quality report that can refresh his or her memory years later when they're finally testifying in court. And it does no good if an officer doesn't have time to properly or adequately process evidence that can stand up to a scrutiny in the courtroom. So this report writing time eats up approximately 1/4 to 1/3 of an officer's time on duty. That's a lot. Our patrol teams are made up of 5 officers, a sergeant and 4 officers. On average, 3.2 of those officers are on duty for any given shift. Why is that? Officers do take time off. They have families. We need our officers to take time off away from work to maintain their sanity. I remember a time when I was on patrol. I needed my time away. Officers themselves get sick, or they have family members that get sick. They have to take care of them. Unique to law enforcement is time in court. If court is during a workday, that officer is not taking calls. They're in the courtroom, in bed, for all 8 hours of the day. And of course, there's training. Law enforcement is not the same profession it was for me 15 years ago when I first started. And certainly for other officers that were trained 20, 25 years ago. We have to attend ongoing training each and every year, the training that is mandated by the state, in addition to training that provides us up-to-date best practices, methods of policing. This chart represents where Redmond compares to other cities of the same size. In red is our officers per thousand ratio, 1.35. Over on the far right, in purple, is the state average for officers per thousand of 1.65. In gold is the violent crime rate in Redmond. Violent crime being homicides, robberies, sex crimes, and aggravated assaults. So felony level assaults. We're above the state average in violent crime, below the state average in staffing. We're of our light-sized cities, only Grants Pass is higher than us in violent crime. And you'll see some, Tualatin, West Lynn, Forest Grove here. These are 2015 numbers. Those agencies didn't report 2015 numbers. However, looking at their 2014 numbers, they're right in line with other like-sized cities similar to them, the Woodburns and McMinnvilles, meaning we're still above those numbers. When you look at our officers per thousand ratio of 1.35 to this national average of 1.67, that's an actual 8 officer deficit at 0.32. Makes the difference of 8 officers. Can't talk about staffing and increasing our staffing without at least mentioning an officer's salary. On average, a police officer here at City of Redmond makes $77,000 a year. I mention that because it's right where they ought to be paid for a city their size. They're not paid too much, they're not paid too little. Many of you own businesses, have worked in business, have managed, and you know that there's more costs to an employee than just their take-home pay. Once you go all in for all costs associated with that officer, to include training, equipment that we need to purchase to outfit that officer, their portion of a vehicle so they can get to you or your family member's 911 call for help. All told, all in, $144,000 a year for one police officer here at the City of Redmond. And that's an ongoing figure each and every year.
Was the 77 number including benefits, or does this include benefits?
This number includes the benefits. Each year, the City of Redmond does a community survey. 2016 was their first year. 2017 in the spring, we did another survey. That survey asks one of the questions asked, where should the city invest more time and resources? Where should they focus their efforts? Not surprisingly and refreshingly, public safety was number one by far over the next 2 priorities, as deemed a priority by those who responded to the survey. Survey went out to the approximately 12,000 account holders that receive a monthly utility bill here in the City of Redmond, and we had a response rate of approximately 15%, which is really good for a survey of that type. When they can either fill it out online, mail in the results, or drop them off. So 15% is actually really good. But with that, we kind of have an introduction to the challenges that we're facing. I'm going to hand this over to Jason, our City of Redmond budget director, and he's going to talk about some of the financials behind this.
Thanks, Curtis. Thanks again for having us today. So yeah, Curtis did a great job of laying out some of the challenges we're facing, and we wouldn't be doing this type of outreach if we thought this is something we accomplish in the annual budget process. So I'd like to give the group a better understanding of our budget process, why we think an additional resource or an additional expense for our public is the route we think is best here, and talk about some of the questions we've gotten. This is our 15th presentation, I think, and we've learned a lot of the questions that are out there and tried to incorporate those into the presentation. So we have an annual budget at the city. We always kick it off this time of year by doing a 5-year forecast, and someone mentioned benefits. PERS is in the news quite frequently. We take factors of how that's going to impact us in the future, and that helps us make sure that not only do we have a solid one-year budget, but we feel we can provide those services into the future. So that's always the kickstart. Council then sets goals in February, and we take that into account as staff is building the budget. We then have a budget put together, and we have a state law that requires us to do budget committee, and that's our 7 city councilors and 7 citizens. By the way, we have a couple positions open on that, so if you're interested in 2 nights a year and understanding and having input into our budget, get in touch with our city recorder. So that's our budget committee, and then we also update the council on a quarterly basis of how we're performing relative to budget. And one question we get is, have we been doing things to address our staffing issues in public safety? And the answer is yes. Curtis mentioned 10 years ago we had 37 officers, and right now we're at 38. Well, that dipped down to 30 about 5 years ago during the recession. And basically 60 cents of every dollar of additional revenue we've gotten in the last 5 years has gone into public safety, mostly funding bringing back those officers that we had lost. Parks has also been a priority as well. Parks was hit pretty hard during the recession from a maintenance standpoint, a staffing standpoint, and Parks is still struggling, just like our police department from a staffing perspective, so we've had a focus there as well. This is our current budget for fiscal year 2018, looking at where the general fund, which would include the property taxes we receive, are going. 58% goes into police, public safety, and Curtis mentioned the all-in cost per officer is $144,000 a year, and a $6 fee would generate 6 officers, or about $900,000 a year. If you compare that $900,000 need relative to some of our other services in the general fund, it's a severe impact. Part of the reason why we don't feel like this is something that can be easily accomplished in our current budget. It's half of our parks and facilities budget. It's a third of our transportation, our road maintenance budget. We have great roads in Redmond. It's cost effective for us to continue to keep those roads in good condition. So we're cognizant of the impacts this adding 6 officers within our current budget would be. Another question we get, have we changed our priorities of how we fund public safety in the past 10 years? The answer to that is no. This is a percentage of the general fund dollars going into public safety. Back in 2009 when we had those 37 officers, we put 57% in. Right now we're at 58%. So we have been consistent as a city providing funding to public safety. So how did we get here? Why don't we have the funds to necessarily fund these officers? It's a resource side, it's our ongoing expenditure side, it's a little bit of both. But one issue we're having is our property tax system. And this is a pretty complicated chart, so I apologize if I lose anyone on this, but this represents 80% of the houses in Redmond during the recession. And we all know that property values were way down during the recession. 80% of the houses in Redmond saw their property tax bills decline. If you look at, for the city, we lost 12% during that time period, and that's because the real market value, according to Measure 50, which was voted in about 1995, becomes the assessed value when it goes below that maximum assessed value, which is what you see as a typical 3% growth per Measure 50. on an existing house. That's the added increase per year. So that was a tough time for our citizens. It was a tough time for our budget. The lasting impact was what happened when the market recovered. And rather than going at 3% a year, we had 4 years of that maximum assessed value growing at 0%. This dotted line represents a 3% increase rather than the roller coaster we saw in Redmond. That gap between where we picked up when we came out of the recession versus had we just grown at 3%, it's about $450,000 a year that we'll never get back. And that's pretty unique to Redmond. If you look at City of Bend, any city in the valley, they typically had 1 year down during the recession. We saw 4 years down in Redmond. I think Prineville probably saw something similar, but it's this, what you see here is fairly unique to Redmond. Another question we get, why don't we do a property tax levy? Why don't we put this in the voters' hands and increase our property taxes? And there's some good reasons why we feel a fee is a better option. One is compression. So measure 5 says that the real any house cannot have more than $10 of general government per real, or 1,000 of real market value. So if that happens, all the taxing entities within that specific area will be reduced on the tax revenue they get until it gets back to $10. And so that is definitely the case in Redmond. We are in compression. So an example would be is if we asked for a levy and got it, we would have to ask for about 13% more than what we actually would need to fund those 6 officers. And that would reduce Redmond Fire, that would reduce 911, that would reduce Deschutes County. So the overlapping taxing districts would be impacted if we were to get more tax revenue into the city. If that makes sense. Also, it's inefficient. We know everybody just probably paid their property tax bill, I hope. And that's when we receive all our revenue, November, December. And we have to be able to pay those officers July through November. So we would have to set aside $300,000 right now to be able to cut the payroll and fund our officers through that first part of the year. And then finally, we've talked about this, it's proven that it's unstable. If we want to have a long-term funding mechanism for our officers, the public safety fee is the best way to do that. We noticed during the recession, people still pay their water bill, people still pay their sewer bill, and this would be that same idea. Yes, sir.
If you did a tax levy and it was voted on, do you know what the cost of just putting that together and bringing it to the public would be? I'm assuming more than a decision to do it through your monthly utility bill.
The upfront cost to put it on the ballot, it's not that much. If we do it during a general election, it's not significant. Ben, a few years ago, went after a gas tax, and they got hit pretty hard in the media about the cost of that, but that was a special election. I think it cost them $60,000, $70,000. So we would aim through this process, if the council decided to go that route, we would aim for the May ballot, which is the general election.
Okay.
So other cities in Oregon, this is not a slide to say, hey, everyone else is doing it, so we should do it. It's more of a slide of the symptoms of financial issues cities in Oregon are having. So if we look at just public safety fees, 13 cities have now put a public safety fee into place, and 90% of those have done so in the last 4 years. So we're seeing this public safety fee pick up speed. So Redmond's issue as we've talked about, is police staffing. That's our big issue. Our roads are good, our parks are pretty good. Our main issues, public safety, staffing. If you're City of Bend, their issue streets. If you're some city in the valley, it may be parks. The point is there's multiple fees that cities are using to support their general fund, whether that be a transportation utility fee, a gas tax, a public safety fee, or a parks maintenance fee. If you look at populations over 20,000, 65% have one of those fees in place. And if you boil that down to an average monthly cost, it's about $10. So once again, not that everybody else is doing it, we should do it. It's just another symptom of the challenges cities are facing across Oregon. So we talked about that ratio of officers per thousand and how that equates to 8 officers. We feel the right number of officers that is 6, and that is $6 a month, about $900,000 a year. And that would get us to about 1.6 officers per thousand, which is pretty darn close to that state average. There is some confusion. Why is the city proposing to increase my water bill? Or a lot of misconceptions out there. City has a utility bill, and there's multiple things on that bill, as Curtis talked about. Water, sewer. We even contract with High Country to put your garbage bill on there, and that's an efficiency thing. So a lot of confusion out there, but the best and most efficient way to get this bill, if it were approved by the City Council, is through our monthly utility bill. So Curtis is going to now take a chance to talk about our measurable benefits that we think the fee would give our community.
I was given a warning that if we went past 1 o'clock, people would be getting up and walking out, so I'll try to talk quickly. We didn't think it would be fair to go hat in hand to City Council or to the public asking for additional funds without being able to provide some sort of measure if this was successful or not. So we have proposed 7 metrics that we feel we can start turning the dial on and make a significant change that would benefit everybody. First and foremost, our average team size. Remember, I said 3.2 officers on duty on average because of all those things that every business, every shift, every manager has to deal with. By taking those 6 officers, putting 1 on each patrol team, we'd have an average increase to 4.4 officers on duty on average. That spreads workload. So each patrol team would now have 6 people instead of 5. It's a 38% increase over the average number on duty now to where we'd see an average on duty if the public safety fee is put in place. Number 2, with the remaining 2 officers, so 6 officers with $6 a month, 4 on patrol, leaves 2 behind, we'd form a 2-person drug enforcement team or a street crimes team. We know, as I articulated earlier, that there's a nexus between drug issues and property crime. Our number 1 issue, criminal issue in Redmond, property crimes. If we have 2 officers working full-time to target street-level drug users, drug sales, we can get stolen property back to its owners as quicker, more efficiently, and hold those people accountable at a much higher rate than we do so already. I don't want to make you think that we're not doing this at this time. We are writing search warrants. We do conduct drug investigations as we receive information. It takes a long time if an officer is sitting in uniform, in a marked patrol car, tied to a radio, trying to watch a drug house. It's amazing. Not too many drug transactions take place. It's very surprising. But when you have a specialized team that is not tied to the radio, is not operating a marked patrol car, they can see this criminal activity and then investigate, write search warrants, and get into houses. Related to number 2 is number 3, the number of drug-related operations, primarily being search warrants being executed to go into these drug houses, getting stolen property back to their owners and holding people accountable. Number 4, When you increase police staffing, you're spreading the workload. So those 23,000 calls for service that are coming in are now spread out over more officers that are on duty at any given moment. You increase uncommitted time. Uncommitted time means officers have the time to be proactive, and that frequently takes the form of traffic enforcement. We know that there's a relationship between traffic enforcement and traffic crashes. We saw this during our recession. So when we had to pull back to 30 officers back in 2012, we did not have a traffic team because we had to plug vacancies on patrol so officers were available to respond to 911 calls for help, because that is what patrol officers do. That's what we're here for. During that time, when we didn't have a traffic enforcement team, we saw our traffic crash numbers increase. So there is a relationship between traffic enforcement and traffic crashes. And we call back to that slide with all those bar graphs. Number one is traffic issues. We respond to traffic complaints more than anything else. I didn't talk about the other 5, sorry. 5 and 6. Number 5, investigate and solve crimes quicker. Again, going back to staffing. Everything goes back to staffing. If you increase the amount of staffing, you increase the amount of officers to spread that workload. Officers have more time to adequately investigate crimes initially, up front, because when are we more likely to catch the offender who did something wrong? As soon as possible. So if an officer has the time to spend with a victim, or with witnesses, process a crime scene for fingerprints, or do a neighborhood canvass, or search for video, follow up with credit card companies or banks, whatever, we're able to identify these suspects quicker and hold these people accountable. But if an officer's more worried about that call that's coming down the pipe next, it's quickly going to wrap things up, get on to this next call, get on to the call after that, and before you know it, it's been 2-3 weeks before that original call, the officers had time to even follow up. A lot of information, witnesses have been unidentified, crimes slip through the cracks. Bring back downtown foot patrol, number 6. Downtown is a very special place for businesses. People come downtown with their families. We would like to see an officer on duty downtown on foot, because nothing says increase in officer presence and perception of public safety like an officer on foot that you're seeing. That same officer, we also tasked with walking down to Sam Johnson Park and Hope Playground and interacting with families and youth in a positive context, not always just waiting for that 911 call for help. Number 7, going back to community survey. Over the course of 5 years, we'd like to see a 10% increase in the perception of public safety here in Redmond. On that same survey, a question asked, do you feel safe walking alone in your own neighborhood during the day? And also that same question, but at night, do you feel safe walking alone in your own neighborhood at night? The response to those questions was 87% yes and 50% no, or excuse me, 50% yes, respectively. So 87% during the day, 50% at night. We'd like to see both those numbers go up. And we feel over the course of a 5-year period with these added staffing and added resources, we can begin to change the dial and make people feel safer in Redmond where they live. Where are we? Well, we're here. But where are we in the process? We started this conversation in September. We've done numerous presentations and trying to solicit feedback and have conversations. We did a check-in with the City Council, our first check-in with City Council last night. We have another check-in planned in January. And in February, I have identified February 13th as a deadline that City Council needs to make a decision on what to do. Either tell us to stop and go no further, shelve this idea. Yes, we're going to proceed, and we're going to proceed with the city ordinance and do it that way. Or we're going to proceed to at least the next step and potentially put it on the May ballot and ask for voters to vote one way or the other. So that's where we find ourselves. There's a need and there's a way. We just are hopeful that to get as many people on board as agreeing with this, even as unconventional as it may be.
Question. I actually asked this question when I was still on council.